Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. Ann Mercer Feddersen is a consummate volunteer and a valued resource for Iowa City. Ann's volunteer services touch a wide array of organizations in education, the social services, libraries, church, health organizations, and business. Her interests range from the Iowa City Public Library, United Way, Red Cross, the Cancer Society, the League of Women Voters, Free Lunch, HACAP, Goodwill, Head Start, and Project Green. In 1960, she was named Iowa City's Woman of the Year for her community service. As a 1941 graduate of Iowa City's City High, she was selected to the City High School Hall of Fame in 1989. In addition to her volunteering, Ann and her family have been an integral part of our community for almost 4 generations. Ann's family history with this area began when her grandfather, Samuel Mercer, moved to Iowa City in 1896 and purchased the Iowa City Press. Ann was born in 1924, University Hospital, which is now Seashore Hall. Ann's parents and grandparents were also community volunteers. Her grandfather served on the school board, as did her father and Ann herself. This is the only father-daughter combination in school board history. She and her husband Dick raised 2 children in Iowa City, Richard and Nancy. They have 4 grandchildren. Besides her community involvement, Ann finds time to swim, enjoy the theater, and attend elder hostel trips to such varied places as the Everglades, Italy, France, Belize, and Poland. Welcome to One of a Kind, Ann. It's hard to know where to start your story, but I'm going to start with your family, since a lot of people who are new to Iowa City would be interested to know about Samuel and what brought him here to start this wonderful tradition of having the Mercers in Iowa City.
Well, I think you've just thrown me a question I don't know the answer to. I'm not sure why he came to Iowa City. But he'd been in printing and I think some newspaper business in Ohio. My father was born in Newcomerstown, Ohio, and I think they came from there or close around. But grandfather had a family when he came. They had 6 children, and I think the 6th, as far as I know, they came right to the house on Summit Street that Mary Ann had. And it was probably the only house on that side of the street, I think the one across. But anyway, Summit Street has sort of held the family until just a few years ago. But anyway, grandfather came, and he was creative adventurer, plunger, I guess. And my father always said, were it not for his mother, they might have been plenty hungry often, because grandfather would be off on some wonderful plan. And they came out all right eventually, but he was a very big, handsome man, about maybe 6'2", and my grandmother just made 5 feet.
What a couple.
But I take it she was the one that held the glue, the glue that held them together. And so he started the newspaper with some other man whose name I have forgotten, and had a printing business on the side. Then it kind of the printing business took over. He sold the Iowa City Press to, I believe, somebody who had the newspaper called the Citizen, so that it, became the Press Citizen, and went on with the printing business, which then has become Economy Advertising Company and Bankers Advertising, which my cousin's child, Bill Bywater, is the president now, and they have just celebrated their 100th year. So the business has been around a while.
And they were very involved in the community. Was Samuel as much as your father, Willis?
Well, I don't really, yeah, probably, but my father, probably, my grandfather, probably, but my father.
What were his interests in
Well,
Iowa City?
The business community particularly, but he was in a group that had lunch together, I think, called the Spinach Club, that was many doctors from University Hospital and some faculty people. So there was some connection with university folk too. Really, what I remember the most of my father doing was during World War II. He was in World War I, but he was mostly at Camp Dodge.
I mean, he didn't go overseas.
He was just waiting to go overseas when the war ended. But when World War II came along, he was too old to be called up. And he was the head of, or very involved anyway, in the civil defense of the locality and on the draft board. But particularly civil defense, and they did a great deal in town of raising money for war projects, and they'd have big auctions of, well, one time I know it was a cow, because meat rationing, this was pretty important. And so my dad was always organizing that kind of thing. And I guess it's all right to tell. One of the men's clubs in town had slot machines. It was, I guess it was legal, in a private club, you see. But they supplied almost all the money for the civil defense from the profits from this. And it was not one that my dad had belonged to, but he promptly joined, whatever it was, because they were so...
Because he believed so much in this civil
very
defense.
helpful on supporting it.
Well, Ann, tell me, Mercer Park, that's named after your uncle.
My uncle.
Your uncle.
Leroy Mercer was the politician in the family. He was in the business, in the economy advertising too, but I believe I'm right, was first on the city council, but then he was in the state legislature for a long time, first in House of Representatives and then as a senator. He was a Democrat in the days when they always said that they convened in a phone booth. And so he was, I'm sure, extremely capable, but also because he was one of the few, he was on the interim committee, which in those years, the interim committee, did you ever hear of it?
No.
It was extremely important in the legislature because they really did only meet every other year for, 6 months? So to run the state business and make all kinds of decisions between sessions of the legislature, the interim committee did it. So so then he...
was on the city council, did you tell me?
I think he had been before he went to Des Moines, but he either retired or got unelected. I'm not sure which on that, but I know, Dora Hudson was the mayor and died. And they were desperately, really needing organization in the city council, and so they asked Uncle Roy to come back on the council, which he did, and was the mayor for quite a little while. And things got pretty well straightened out and were going well. Anyway, Mercer Park, I suppose, was maybe purchased then or shortly after. And so anyway, it was named for him.
It's so fun to think about you being, living all your life here. Irving Weber and Chris Schrock, and that's about it for my guests on One of a Kind.
They've been born here.
And do you two, does Irving call you and ask you a few questions and vice versa
Yes.
about the history of Iowa City?
And he calls me and asks, and then I don't know, and so he tells me.
He tells you. Good. I want to get on with your story. You went off after you graduated from high school. You were very involved and active. You went off to Wellesley. What brought you back before graduation?
The war, really, but the plan always was to go 2 years and come back because all my family graduated from the university, and I think they hoped I wouldn't, and I expected to. But traveling to the East Coast after the war started was very problematical. It was tough. And one time I got bounced and had to sit in, maybe it was Dayton, Ohio, I'm not sure. But troop movement
took
would
preference.
always take preference.
Sure.
So it was tough, but that wasn't the whole reason. Wellesley went on a strange schedule to save fuel, and they went straight through the summer, then had the fall semester, and then quit at Christmas and didn't reconvene until the 1st of April. So, see, I just went through what actually be 3 semesters, and then
Came back to the University
here.
of Iowa and graduated from here.
Yeah.
Were you a psychology major?
Yes.
And were you ever interested in going into your father's business? I mean, you were an only child. You didn't have any brothers to go.
Oh, well, you're so much younger than I am. That would never have been considered.
Is that a disappointment looking back, kind of? I mean,
No, not really.
Not really.
It was just so unthought of and unheard of for
That
a
you
woman
would
to
go
go
in.
into business. It just wasn't done, at least in the way my family would have looked at it. And I'm delighted I really had the freedom to not be expected to have a job.
Well, and Iowa City would be much poorer had you not, if you'd had a job,
Come
because you
now.
wouldn't have given all
That's
this time.
ridiculous.
In 1947, then you got married to
Yep.
Dick Feddersen, and that
Yes.
means.
College, New Mexico, so they live in Albuquerque, and they have 2 children. And Nancy has just come back to Iowa City just to go back in the university. She's been teaching and now would like to get a special ed certification, and she has 2 children.
So you have 4
We've got
grandchildren.
them around for a while.
That's good. Where did this deep and abiding commitment to community service come from, or who influenced you on this, or who led the way for you on this?
I really don't have any idea. I suppose it was my parents that was kind of expected. And, if you aren't gainfully employed, then you jolly well better do all the various service things in town. It's a way to earn your space on earth, I guess.
Is that how you
It's
feel?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Don't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
So was your mother civically oriented too?
Yes, but now probably not nearly so much in the social welfare end. See, I worked as a social worker at Psychopathic Hospital, and that was the area I was always interested in and had planned to go on to, and then I would have maybe had a job. But when my children when Nancy started kindergarten, they had just recently started a school of social work at the university. So I thought this would be perfect. I had time and I could do it, and I went to talk to the dean and apply. And this was, middle 50s. And he was totally opposed to part-time students, wouldn't hear of part-time students. Well, I couldn't do it any other way.
Sure.
Very opposed to older students. Now, I was all of 35, but that was
the times.
it
You're
was
right.
a non-traditional student, and that just wasn't what he was about. So that went out the window. I had been in the child welfare department, and that was gone in the university. It was kind of absorbed into the psych department, although really when Robert Sears left, it just kind of faded. And part of it then was in the Department of Home Economics. So I did start then on an advanced degree in home ec, and there was a marvelous woman who was the head of Child and Family Development was what it was called. And so I started with her for a year or two, and then she left the university, and that whole segment was gone. So you learn
Where
a
did
lot.
that leave you?
Well, nowhere.
No.
I tried. I worked at Head Start as a graduate research project. I was there full time, one whole year.
Wonderful.
And the idea was, to study it and write it up and so forth, which the writing never came to fruition, but it was a wonderful, I did it really for 2 years with that kind of time commitment to it, so you really got to know the people and the kids.
And of all these organizations that you've had your finger in and given your time and your effort, is there one that has kind of meant the most to you?
That would be hard. I'm sure the schools I would put first, and I've gone on volunteering in schools ever since I was on the board. But probably the thing I would be the proudest of is the development of HACAP, which was the Hawkeye Area Community Action Project that was the local, developed through the War on Poverty program that Lyndon Johnson instigated in about 65, wouldn't it have been? And it just seems to me that was, had it been followed up, would have been the answer to a lot of our welfare problems, because it was based that those who were served had to be involved on the boards. And the first HACAP board was half recipients, if you can use that term, people who would qualify for the benefits, and half community people. And a lot of training went into it, and a lot of these people who had never sat in a meeting and certainly never chaired one or
could voice
Robert's
their
Rules
voice
of
be
Order,
heard.
were just came, and I know them in the community still, that they're capable, job-holding people. Another philosophy that they had in Head Start anyway was an employment ladder that the parents of the youngsters who were eligible for Head Start, and it was all based on income, could have jobs, had to be given the jobs in the preschool, but they had to move up the job ladder, and they could occupy a slot for only 2 years and then had to move on. Well, occasionally that worked against someone who just
Couldn't do
didn't
it.
have, well, kind of didn't have the courage to try. But mostly it really pressed them forward, and they went on and then went out. And one mother became the director of Johnson County Welfare Social Services and did just a magnificent job at it.
You mentioned before HACAP, you mentioned your love of working with the schools and being on the school board. I want to talk a little bit about the time before you were on the board. Your father was on the board, and this was the time in Iowa City that the property for City High was being looked
He
at.
was on the board when they bought the property for City High, and then he was president of the board when the school was built.
And this was not, this was not popular with a segment of Iowa City. Tell us about this.
No, it was a huge rift to the point that we got threatening phone calls and
What was the issue?
obscene. Particularly, it was because it was so far out of town. Everybody said they were building the high school in West Branch.
Because City High used to be by Mercy Hospital when
Right.
you went to City
Yeah,
High.
that's right. And there were houses all the way out to City High, but it wasn't very populated, and there was nothing beyond it, of course. Well, it was extremely foresighted to buy a lot of acres. As you can see, they've utilized them very well.
Yes.
But people were furious about it.
So that was one of the big issues when your father Willis was president of the school board. Now, what
Right.
about you when you came on the board? It was the Vietnam War was
It was
raging.
all that upset and turmoil. The arch conservatives, it was the John Birch Society materials, which were distributed, and then those kinds of arguments would be brought up. And the school board meetings were known to be the best show in town. And the meeting room was packed.
Like 100, more than 100?
And
Who was on the board with you at that time?
well,
Just a couple names. that
well,
we might-
John Dane was, and he was great fun. Russell Ross was on the board when I first came on. And, oh dear, isn't that awful? Phil Klein.
Oh, yes, I remember Phil. So you really had a strong board that steered its way through this period.
It was quite difficult, and the superintendent was Mr. Ruswig, who brought lots of controversy because he did want to make some changes, and that. But it was just a time of turmoil when people were fighting about, or upset about all kinds of things, and it just kind of landed on the school board. So when I then later went to a meeting and found 5 people there, the observer from the League of Women Voters and somebody from the athletics, I couldn't believe that they could sit in a peaceful meeting and not have all these challenges. And it was not pleasant, I didn't feel.
And
we
you were on for
ran
how-
into the racial problem. First time at Iowa City, I think, woke up that they needed to
Look at this
to
issue.
deal with it, among lots of other things they were dealing with.
And moving on, we've got so much to cover, and I'd like to know, you've been a part of Iowa City for so long. You must have some feelings about, one always hears about the town and gown.
Oh,
and
yeah.
a perception maybe that there is a split. What do you feel about this issue?
I know as growing up that my parents felt there was this definite split that, how do I say it, university people just felt superior to the business people. And do you know anything about the study clubs in Iowa City that's been developed? They started back probably late 1800s.
You're talking about
1900s.
Raphael, 19th
Yes.
century club.
Shakespeare. 2 of those were absolutely only for university wives. The others were a mix, which was wonderful to begin it. And I think the study club started because highly educated women came to Iowa City with their husbands as faculty. I mean, the husbands were faculty people, and they had no way to use their education, so they started these. And they worked hard on their papers and so on. Now, by the time I went into it, we were getting fairly sloppy. Now, I practiced my Shakespeare reading
Yes.
before I went to the meeting, but they had met every 2 weeks forever. Finally, because there were busy young women coming in, they went to once a month, and my mother thought that the end of the world had come when, we were beginning to slide. Okay, back to town and gown split. So then I think there was a time when it was not in a major thing at all. I think social groups had developed that I felt it was much more cohesive. Now, again, I think there's quite a division simply because the university people are so apt to move on. And what I hear is, well, why bother getting acquainted? They'll only be here a couple of years. And I think we who've lived here all this time have fought that attitude from the day we started being part of the community. But
So you've seen shifts go back
I
and
think
forth,
so.
and maybe it'll come back again as
and maybe partly it's my perspective, because of course I've
you've been shifting
pulled
too.
out. Well, yeah, we live out on the reservoir now, and that does make quite a difference that you aren't as involved in the town as much.
You're still involved in.
Well, I'll
I know
say
it-
I'm in every day.
You're in every day. Tell me what you do besides your community work. What are your hobbies, Anne? What do you like to?
Well, I walk a lot and swim, and I swim in the reservoir, which apparently I am the only human that does anymore, but I
Good for you.
swear by it.
Good for you.
And, well, I garden very, very badly. Bicycle. But
And you go on these elder hostel
yes.
trips, I read. Have they meant a lot to you?
They're
Has that been
great
great
fun.
adventures?
Yes, I've never been, well, I started to say I've never been skunked on one. I think this last one to Poland. Was maybe not as satisfying. It was billed that we were going to be teaching conversational English. And when I got there, I was assigned a 7th grade class and an 8th grade class, and I'm not a teacher. So I couldn't handle them. And we were supposed to prepare lesson plans. I had no idea what a lesson plan was.
Sounds like the Peace Corps. This sounds like
it was very
like a job for a Peace Corps volunteer.
Well, if they had, I wrote a firm letter to Elder Hostel. This wasn't their program. It was in their catalog, but it was run by something called Global Volunteers, and I think they're the ones who should get the criticism. But I feel they should never let anybody go who wasn't a trained teacher on this particular thing. But the people in it were fun, and the Polish people we met were wonderful. The kids were just kids.
Sure.
But they giggled in Polish.
And you didn't know Polish.
And I did not know Polish. But anyway, on elder hostels, I've always said that if people weren't interesting and alive and alert and fun, they wouldn't be there. And that's
So you really recommend Elder
they
Hostel
are just
for.
wonderful.
That's great.
Yes.
I read a newspaper article about you when you were Woman of the Year that you, and I want to quote.
I hope you realize
Weird. Do you still feel that way?
I still do, and I don't live by it.
You don't
No, now, see, you stick to something and do it beautifully, but
but
I sort of...
but community service has been
Yeah, but
the big thing for
you
you.
know, people who simply lock into the neighborhood centers or something are the ones who really accomplish good things, I think.
I want to know, my last question, where do you think you'll be off to next on your adventure? Do you have something in your
when I got
mind?
home from Poland, Dick mentioned that he thought I should stay home for a while.
So you're
he
going
isn't interested in doing these, so I have done it alone. And I think maybe this time he got a little lonesome and also thought I'd bitten off more than I could chew. So I have no idea.
You don't know.
But
It's open.
not going to stay home. No.
And I guess it isn't my last, this is my last question.
Yes.
What do you think, what is your favorite part of Iowa City? Do you have, what is it you just could tell one of your
Alan.
friends who lives on East Coast, West Coast, or down in the South?
Of Iowa City?
Yes.
Or I was thinking my favorite would be a park of some sort. So that isn't exactly Iowa City.
No, anything that you just, is it the people here? Or
Sure.
is it's the people.
Yes.
All right, well, we'll end with that.
All right.
Thank you, Anne, for being my guest. My guest on One of a Kind has been the well-known, well-respected, and well-loved Anne Feddersen. Anne, with humility and good humor, has been a consistent advocate and loyal member of numerous Iowa City organizations and institutions. Whether she's reading aloud to children in the schools, running a Red Cross blood drive, being a friend to the public library, serving as a United Way director, PTA president, docent at the museum, serving free lunch or volunteering at the University Hospital, working for hospice, or even digging trees and shrubs for Project Green, Anne gives our community a generous and precious gift, her time and leadership. Anne Feddersen is one of a kind.